So these are the two front pages we have seen in previous editions. These are the two front pages of the Communist Party Morning Star of the 25th of August, which is Tuesday, 25th of August, and Monday, 24th of August. Again, this is the 24th of August that Johnson is actually robbing the NHS for private conglomerates, and there is this Boris Johnson regime order to so-called care homes to let elderly people die, not to treat them. So the NHS is being killed, literally. The Daily Telegraph today, Thursday, the 27th of August, 2020, has got typically diversionary kind of headlines that don't show Boris Johnson in the actual realities and failures and negligence and destruction of lives program that he's engaged in. It is giving a positive propaganda on the front page, the main leader on the front page of the Daily Telegraph today, Thursday, the 27th of August, 2020. And it is luring people with yet another line in bonanza. The victims of virus will be paid to quarantine. This is appealing to the people's basic kind of denominator, not any consciousness or conscientious awareness of responsibility for safety of society and community or others. And they're running, of course, this huge photograph of the BBC prom queen. The line is obviously against the idea of the BBC, not the actual BBC now, because the BBC, as the evidence shows, and as I have been saying for a very long time, is dysfunctional and is not delivering the truth that Reith, supposedly the founder of the BBC, pledged to deliver the truth. But the BBC, as an idea of a kind of statewide public service broadcaster, is the one that is the target of the Daily Borisgraph, the Daily Mail, and all the proto and sub-fascists that operate the so-called British media that is based in London and is known as Fleet Street collectively. So they're following up with this big picture of this woman who is saying that she was victimized and wrongly blamed by the BBC, others in the BBC, the hierarchy. So there is a bigger picture of an image of her on page 3. And she is quoted as saying that it was the most idiotic decision as it alienates the core support of the BBC. And the core support, by the core support, she is meaning the likes of Lawrence Fox and other racists that have been being given platforms by talk radio and other racist outfits. And we shall be talking about those in due course. Now, she's saying that the Telegraph piece has got a byline to someone called Haile Dixon. And the subheading is Music World Rallies to Defense of Women Under Fire for Plan to Abandon Songs with Slavery Links. So this is about racism. It's about slavery. The Daily Boris Graph is the actual cringer. It is peddling the lie that to cut links with brazenly slavery-linked traditions or routines is itself wrong. Not that slavery is wrong, not that imperialism is wrong, not that racism is wrong. So that's what they're saying. And so the Daily Boris Graph, as I have been pointing out and has to be pointed out, because this is being this is a rare thing, because most newspapers are not bought these days. People are watching online, quote, news and the equivalents and completely misconceived summaries of what the newspaper is saying. This program, coming from London, being recorded in London as part of the KhoodeelaarTV Channel, is called Diagnosing Fleet Street. Now, at this stage, it is important to point out that there is no diagnosis of Fleet Street anywhere else. The mushrooming online channels that are being broadcast haven't produced a diagnosis, and they're not diagnosing. They're doing the kind of one-off things depending on their particular probably interest or kind of involvement. But as a whole, generally, there is no diagnosis of the British media, meaning the London-centric media. This is the only platform and forum. So anyone who is watching, either live or whether they are watching it after the actual time and date of broadcast, is welcome to cite and refer to this and use the reference, as long as they expressly and clearly acknowledge the source very clearly and in full, as the running is going, the ticker going underneath the image. And that is the legal minimum, ethical minimum, transparency minimum. So we are providing the service without any charge, very freely, and without any license fee or anything, on condition that it is used totally morally, ethically, and for the purpose of sharing the truthful exposition that this contains and also represents and implies. And there are other things in the Daily Boris Graph, including, surprisingly, a photograph of Boris Johnson that is probably provided to them by an agency or somebody who doesn't belong to the Boris Graph's agenda. That picture shows Boris Johnson quite kind of looking quite uncomfortable, to say the least, to kindly say. And the caption they put on that picture, the picture will come up in a minute. Prime Minister Boris Johnson seems rather uncomfortable yesterday, so I was right to say the caption contains, this is uncomfortable, and exactly that is what he looks like. As he sits with pupils in the gym to take part in a get to know you induction session with 7-year-olds during a visit to Castle Rock School in Colville in Leicestershire. That unflattering, uncomfortable picture, that is the picture. And critics of Boris Johnson, of which there are a few, despite the one-sided propaganda by the Daily Borisgraph, which has literally bought him. Ideologically, Boris Johnson has been purchased by the interests that represent, or the interests that are represented in the ownership of the Daily Borisgraph. He has been purchased for millions of pounds. And the whole of the Telegraph, or the Borisgraph, is full of items that are really not concerning themselves and concerning the violations of human rights, the death of Marcy Baguma in a flat in Glasgow in Scotland on the 22nd of August 2020. Marcy Baguma died of starvation, and before she died, she was stopped. She was stopped under the so-called asylum regulations from working. So she was declared legally not entitled to work. So they stopped her working and they caused her death. So they killed her. And she, of course, is the second known asylum seeker, that a refugee that has died in the last fortnight. One is the Sudanese person who died near Sanget, or whose body was found near Sanget in France. And he was reportedly using a dinghy that, and despite the fact that he didn't know how to swim. And his death followed the 2 weeks of propaganda and hatred against migrants and war-like preparations and behavior by the UK's Interior Minister, who is called Home Secretary, who is Priti Patel. Priti Patel is the daughter of refugees from East Africa, and her origin is, of course, India, Gujarat in India. So Priti Patel, being the Interior Minister in Boris Johnson's regime, fronted a propaganda campaign on a war footing aimed at discouraging any would-be refugees seeking refuge in Britain. So that man died, the Sudanese 28-year-old, who was originally reported as being 16-year-old. The mainstream media later said that his friend who survived, who was with him on the same dinghy, had originally told reporters or made a statement to whoever got to them the first time that his friend was 16 years old. Now, why is that important? Because the age difference between 16 and 28 makes the difference in terms of the proxy war against the migrants and the refugees that the Kent County Council had been engaged in by Priti Patel and Boris Johnson, because the moral kind of weak point that they were trying to exploit among the people who support the rights of the refugees was that the Kent County Council, which is the nearest county council that is physically accessed by people coming across the shore, across the channel, and it is legally obliged to accept or give priority to children. So 16 is a child. So the suggestion by the media, which were gleefully covering the fact that he was 28-year-old, implied suggestion evident in the presentation and the exhibition and the parade of his body, his face, his picture, and the fact that he was 28 years old, 28 years old, was to suggest that migrants were lying, that they were unreliable, that they were telling lies. That is not the case, because his friend, whoever his friend, there is no real description as to the history of their friendship or acquaintance. They might have just met in the concentration camp like situation created by the racists in France, and they may have not had any chance or time or reason to inquire as to how exactly old they were. But apart from the fact that the mainstream media, which runs the anti-migrant, racist, hateful propaganda, there is the other fact that the so-called alternatives like the Morning Star and the Guardian, supposedly the Guardian is an alternative to the agenda run by the racist titles, and the Mirror to an extent, they all fail. That failure is not an accidental failure. Remember, we are diagnosing the media. We are not repeating or kind of citing or quoting for the sake of it any of their contents. We are examining right now here as things are going on, contemporaneously as things happen, not some kind of 10 years, 20 years later. And to anyone who is a, quote, researcher trying to compile a piece about the media, stealing any of this stuff, please don't steal any of this stuff, because this diagnosis may come across as simply stated and easily stated, but it actually entails a very deep understanding and study of all aspects of the so-called mainstream media. So it would be best to actually ascribe whatever the contents, the analysis to us, attribute and ascribe to us. Don't steal and don't plagiarize. So you are most welcome to use the information, the analysis, the contents, but do not steal and do not lie, because this is a unique world exclusive engagement for the truth and against the lying role played by the British media and the lying role being played by the imperialist racist media at the same time, same fortnight, where they're going to town against the idea of the BBC, dropping any links with the slavery era by the British powers that be. There is a very important point to be made. British doesn't mean ordinary people in Britain. British means the British regime, the government, the establishment, the powers or the power holders that actually exercise power against most ordinary British people, most white people that have never been, in the majority of the cases, never been in a position where they have to migrate. Those who are in this country, I mean, the historical migration and occupation of Australia and North America, Canada, and what is now the USA and the rest of the American continent, that will take a longer discussion. So we are not having that, but the point has to be made that the entire world, even now, the entire world is occupied by migrants. And the lands belonging to the original nations, let's say, that's the phrase I prefer to use. Original nations across the huge landscape of what is now Canada, and the original nations of what is now the USA, and the original nations across the rest of the American continent. These were people that do not look European. They're not European. They look like Asian people. And that goes back to the geological events that happened millions of years ago. But These are people, original people that are Asian people. So the North America and the entire continent of America actually was inhabited by Asian people, what is now Asian people, because of the geological kind of differences that were caused by the earth splitting and all the rest of it. Now, but essentially, those original nations were uprooted, driven out, or murdered, or massacred, genocided by Europeans coming from the, let's say, the 14th century, 15th century onwards. 15th century, that is after the death of the Christ, using this particular calendar. So the 15th century onwards, they committed massacres of the local people before they settled down as the what we know and as they claim to be the Canadians and Americans and the Argentinians and the Brazilians and the Mexicans and all the other people. All these countries are being, like Venezuela and other places. Venezuela is particularly relevant to the context of British discussion because of Jeremy Corbyn's connection and Ken Livingstone's connections. Essentially, migrants, the murderous migrants, have been Europeans committing murders in Africa, in North America, in America, in Australia, in New Zealand. And they murdered the local people and they took over the local lands. So the local original nations, what they call the Aborigines, these are the original nations. Aborigines is a derogatory term, and the preferred correct term is original nations. There are in Australia, across Australia, what is now Australia, there were literally hundreds of original nations. In New Zealand, proportionate numbers. So looking at the actual maps and the demographies and the list and the entries on the Wikipedia, it would not appear that that is the case, but that is the case. That is the fact. So when they say that one Somali African 28-year-old or 16-year-old, doesn't matter, is threatening the very security and safety of Britain, and safety and security is the angle that Sue Reed actually specializes in, and she actually said as much. She said in her piece for the Daily Mail group that, quote, we don't know. By we, she meant white people in Britain, not the people like me and other people who are not Europeans, but we are as much in Britain as anybody else. And we are as concerned. In fact, in my case, I'm more concerned about the implications, the moral implications, the demographic implications, the economic, social, sociological, and other implications than anybody else that is doing this kind of presentation on the role of the media, the actual corrupt composition of the editorial line. So Sue Reed should include the possibility that people like myself have been campaigning for bigger rights for humanity than she will ever be able to grasp. Perhaps that is the reason she cannot grasp it. I have been campaigning for international human rights all the time, and I have been uniquely calling for practical steps that not just British, but the other governments can take, and they can address both the poverty in the countries of origin currently, and also the hysteria that is kind of cultivated by the likes of Priti Patel, Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage, Charlie Elphicke, and other races whose very career and position, the claim to career and post, depends on their being able to stir up hatred and misinformation, and racism. They are the most destructive types of persons that are in anywhere on the platforms and in any position in power. They are not doing anyone any good at all by lying. And society is not benefiting from these liars inciting racism and hatred. To the point where this woman, Marcy Baguma, young mother who died, and her death was only kind of found out about when her child, who was starving, had been starving, was crying so loudly that people from outside or people passing by, I don't know the actual construction, the structure of the building, but in a flat, her child was crying. And when people entered the flat, how they entered, I'm not aware of, but the details, but they found the mother's body and the child is crying and the child had not eaten. Now that is the reality of the hatred that Priti Patel is actually spreading, and she is guilty of spreading, because she is the interior minister and Boris Johnson is the prime minister. So both of them are guilty of this wrong that has been done to this mother and the wrong that has been done to the Somali person who was found dead near Sangatte in France. And they're doing this, as I've been saying, by actively violating the UK's obligations under international treaties, international charters, international declarations, international conventions, all of which uphold the rights of people like the asylum seeker Marcy Beguma, who they have killed now, and the Somali or Sudanese, whatever the nationality, either Sudan or Somalis, this 28-year-old African person. And there is no kind of vagueness in the texts of these declarations. It's very clear that people fleeing persecution, fleeing famine, hunger, or genocide deserve the highest protection from the receiving country or the country they're seeking asylum or refuge in. And just to give a taste of the consistency in the cruelty policy that is being practiced by Boris Johnson-fronted government and Priti Patel, is in the fact that they not only deny people like Marcy Beguma the right to work so that they can eat, they can stay alive, but they're also starving. They starved the child, they starved Marcy Beguma to death. They're also starving the idea of the National Health Service by stealing money from it and passing the money on to big pharmaceutical and other operators and businesses. So they are not only starving the people, but they're starving the provider of possible help when it comes to medical help and treatment. And they're starving the idea of the National Health Service by challenging the concept, the founding objectives of the NHS, that it will be providing treatment and health service at the point of need. So it's not just one aspect, it's not just one thing they're doing. They're going back to the dark ages. I mean, how far back they go? How many centuries can we actually travel back through to reach this kind of dire, desperate, deadly darkness that they're inflicting on the majority of the people? And there is no word. There is absolutely no word from Keir Starmer, who is supposed to be the leader of the opposition. And the latest issue or Private Eye, the so-called satirical magazine that supposedly runs supposed caricatures and satirical pieces mocking the leader of the opposition, is completely useless. It doesn't work. It doesn't cut it. The 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 piece in the next issue, which is due next Friday, officially, and I have seen it already because I had to see the magazine when it is actually available, and it was available yesterday, Wednesday, 26th of August 2020. Cover price is £2 for those who are not in Britain or those who are not able to pay for the Private Eye. The summary, the best digest in diagnostic terms, is available from this program, and I'm giving you this lack of any traction in the piece about Keir Starmer. Of course, it's written in a humorous, or supposedly humorous way, supposedly satirical way, but the satire doesn't come across. It is completely in the mold of Ian Hislop, who is the editor of Private Lie, and it is absolutely useless. Just as useless and futile as Ian Hislop's podcast announcing the Paul Foot Award, and his chat with the winner of the Paul Foot Award is absolutely embarrassingly ignorant and stupid, and fails to bring across how bad Britain's regime and the government is, and how badly the people in Britain are being kind of let down and betrayed by various layers, all the layers of the government in this country. I mean, we are not getting anything from the Guardian. We are not getting anything from the BBC, which is a disgrace to the slogan attributed to John Reid, the Scotsman, that the BBC's purpose was to tell the truth. So the BBC has been complicit with the liars cabal that includes Nigel Farage, Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg, and their ilk. And the BBC became the lying outfit brazenly from 2016, when it became aware, or the BBC controllers became aware that the Brexiteering racist haters were getting the kind of go-ahead from the, quote, referendum. And so therefore the BBC is not telling the truth, and it's not diagnosing the lying majority of the Fleet Street papers. And the Guardian is not, and the Morning Star is not, as for reasons I have explained already before. And so what we are doing is, this is the biggest moral gap and vacuum that exists in Britain in terms of the media, mainstream media, and its role. So this Khoodeelaar campaign TV channel is the attempt to fill that gap for moral reason, for democratic reason, for ethical reason, for humanitarian reason, and for international solidarity and understanding and peace reason. And the reason is also very much to do with the preservation and the protection of the planet, and very much to do with the prevention of betrayal by the licensed charities that are supposed to be in place to protect the animals from cruelty and abuse. This channel will be dedicating programs just like Diagnosing the Media. We shall be doing Diagnosing the charities, the big charities, and we shall be diagnosing the government. We shall be diagnosing the democratic structure, the edifice, and we shall be exposing solely, strictly based on evidence, not on conjecture, not on hypothesis, not on prejudice, not on an agenda of our own, because we have no agenda of our own except to tell the truth. Now, this is the most important task any human being can actually take on and deliver. And that is what we are doing. The service to humanity, sharing, doesn't automatically does the job. Sharing the truth and sharing the whole truth is what is needed across the world. And we shall be doing that every day. And we shall be doing this for the purpose of sharing the truth with the people in the world, and for the benefit of the planet and for the benefit of the animals. Millions of animals are being abused across the world. No single animal should be abused. And that is the agenda that has to be created by movement across the world. Animals are being abused. I mean, I don't want to go into any details. The cruelty is absolutely indescribable. And that cruelty and abuse comes not just from criminals and insensitive people, ignorant people, but a large part of it is committed by criminals operating and doing business under the appearances of being vets, veterinary surgeons. And they are co-criminals in business under the banners of veterinary surgeries and charities, so-called animal protection charities. As I said, there will be an evidence-based, fact-based, dedicated program on protecting the animals from cruelty from all quarters, all types. And in the context, and this is the running theme about the diagnosis. In this country, in Britain, in the United Kingdom, there is no legal system that allows access to campaigners on any issue, really, because the legal system is a corrupt business and it is open to big business and big moneyed wealthy operators. And the rest of it is a facade. It's a kind of exhibition parading the myth, just like the claim the Westminster is the mother of Parliament and England was the motherland. This is the promenades row that is going on even today. So there is no fair access to the British UK judicial system, which is a bureaucracy. It's not a justice system, but it's an injustice bureaucracy. It's a bureaucracy run for people with huge money or just about enough disposable money they can spend in litigation and in other similar applications. And the business is divided between three groups. One is the judicial bureaucracy's personnel, and that personnel is A and B. Let's say the A is the members of the so-called judiciary, and B is the members of the misadministration that the judicial bureaucracy is. Most of the times, it's misadministration, maladministration, and it's denial of most of the laws and the legal rights, just like I've been talking about the denial of the charter, convention, declaration, treaty obligations in the context of the hysteria and the racist propaganda against the refugees that the UK has been doing, and the de facto mass murders of any number of people who are in starvation and hunger. So is the legal bureaucracy, which is a criminally operated enterprise as a whole. Exceptions are only very rare, and the exceptions are not enough. The number of the exceptions not enough to constitute any claim to say that the description of the legal bureaucracy as a criminal enterprise is not factually justified or sustainable. So this is my diagnostic analysis about the UK corrupt criminal business called the legal bureaucracy. There was a case, for example, in October 2014. That is the time when the findings of a trial were published. I think 14th of October 2014. And they were published of a case, the result of a case between a man called AA against the London Borough of Southwark. And the contents of the ruling show that the London Borough of Southwark actually employed any number of people who were supposed to be serving housing services to people. And instead of serving the person, this claimant, a group of the employees of Southwark Council over a period conspired to evict him. And they conspired to steal and rob his belongings. The main claim included the claim that he had archives of materials, written materials, documents, and whatever other evidence he had in digital form, in digital devices. And they stole the stuff. And I will see if I can access that ruling to give some part of the quotation from the judgment. And if I can find it, I shall read this as part of the diagnosis of Fleet Street, which absolutely is not. Yes, this is the ruling, which is it's a case neutral citation number 2014 EWHC 500 QB, that is Queen's Bench, and case number HQ, that is the Queen's Bench reference, the two letters HQ 13X02922. It's Royal Courts of Justice in the Strand in London, WC2A 2LL. I had said before I could consult it again that it was published on the 14th of October 2014, which is right. And it was before His Honored Judge Anthony Thornton QC, sitting as a deputy judge of the High Court. And the case is described as between AA, the claimant, and London Borough of Southwark, defendant. The claimant represented himself, Mr. Kelvin Rutledge QC, instructed by the director of the London Borough of Southwark Legal Services for the defendant. And the hearing took place on a number of dates. Here is the list of the dates: 18, 19, 20, 28th, and 29th of November and 23rd of December 2013. Formal hand down of judgment in open court on the 14th of October 2014. So it took almost a year for the judge to study the deliberations and the details before he published the ruling. Formal hand down of HTML version of judgment in open court 14th of October 2014. And it says, the summary, I'll read the summary, the first line. This summary does not form part of the judgment. It is intended to provide a brief summary guide to the reasons for and the result of this case. And the claim summary is an anonymity order confined to the identity and precise address of the claimant has been made in this case. However, any fact referred to in this judgment is not subject to that order. So The name of the person is withheld, which withholding he is entitled to, but the details, the facts referred to are not secret or made anonymous. So he's saying, this judge, at item 3, the claimant had been a social housing tenant of the defendant for 23 years and a tenant of the flat in issue since 2001. So it's like he went to court, or the hearing began about 12 years since he became a tenant of the flat. His rent in that flat had mainly been paid by housing benefits, save for a small weekly shortfall which he had to pay, which by 2012 had risen to 18.59 per week. Throughout the period in that flat, he had been in arrears since this shortfall was only paid in part and intermittently. This had the consequence that his total arrears by the date of his eviction had reached 2,353 pounds 26 pence. In November 2006, a possession order was made, which is subsequently suspended by a succession of 4 orders, culminating in one dated 6th of May 2010. These required the claimant to meet his current weekly rent liability and pay off the arrears in small weekly installments. Nothing was paid following the last of these orders, and the defendant applied for the execution of a warrant for possession. So there are other details about the case. And the main thing I'm saying here is the finding number 8, paragraph number 8, where the judge, Anthony Thornton QC, says that there are various torts and breaches of contract. Now, tort in England is civil wrong. Tort. The judgment reviews the evidence at great length and reaches the following conclusion. There is a whole list of judgments, whole list of hearings. I'm not going to read all of those, except to say the eviction was unlawful and an abuse of process, both because the warrant was issued without the prior permission of the court and in the manner in which it was executed. Now, the second item in that paragraph is the most important one. The various officers of the defendant, that is council employees, conspired, that is the thing, conspired to evict the claimant by unlawful means. Now remember, this is not some kind of rogue landlord, private landlord. It is council employees who are supposed to be upholding the law and the safety of tenure, etc., and tenancy of the tenant. So the various officers of the defendant conspired to evict the claimant by unlawful means, to seize and destroy his possessions by unlawful means, and to cause him harm and loss by evicting him of his possessions by unlawful means. This conspiracy was subsequently covered up by a further conspiracy which gave rise to abuse of process in the subsequent court proceedings and to a continuing deprivation of the claimant's employment, enjoyment of his tenancy, and loss of his possessions. And then number 3, that is subparagraph number 3 in paragraph 8, is 3 officers, that is employees of London Borough of Southwark Council, conspired to evict by unlawful means, to seize and destroy his possessions by unlawful means, and to cause him harm and loss by evicting him of his possession by unlawful means. Yes, 3 officers exercised their powers. That is the actual. I reread the paragraph, subparagraph 2 again, but this is the one that I intended to read, which is the subparagraph 3. 3 officers exercise their powers as public officers in relation to a local authority, secure tenancy for an improper motive. Council employees conspired, the 3 of them, and with the intention of harming the claimant by having him evicted when there were no reasonable grounds for his eviction, and by arranging for his possessions to be seized and destroyed unlawfully. Now, those possessions, remember, are his storage containing data and the digital storage data included. So, subparagraph 4 is the claimant had, as a result of these facts, also been caused loss by the negligence of the Sadak Bara Council by its breach of its right to the quiet enjoyment of his tenancy, and as a result of the lack of respect shown to his private life by the defendant. That is the London Borough of Sadak Council. Now, I'm sitting not far from the London Borough of Sadak Council, just across the river. I'm on the north side of the River Thames, and on the south side, just a bit past the other boroughs like Greenwich, there is this borough of Sadak, which covers a lot of the river side, on the other side of the River Thames. So this is the pattern of the findings, of the evidence. And this is the case called AA versus London Borough of Sadak. And it was, the ruling was published on the 14th of October 2014. And I remember this because on the 14th of October 2014, I was across the river. I had passed the River Thames and gone to Sadak, and I was not far from the Sadak Crown Court. I was sitting in a place and I was writing an email to the London Borough of Tower Hamlets, which is the opposite side of the River Thames from the Sadak side. Sadak is south and Tower Hamlets is on the northern side. And I wrote the email to Tower Hamlets Council's employees concerned. And employees in the mainly was corresponding with the so-called legal section in the Tower Hamlets Council. And I referred to that case. I referred to the very clear similarities in the behavior of Tower Hamlets Council employees in relation to the claim that I was representing to them. I was advocating. And that was 2014, October the 14th of October 2014. And that was still the time when Lutfur Rahman was in place, quote, as the mayor in the name of Tower Hamlets. I say name of, not of Tower Hamlets, because Lutfur Rahman being in that post was an abuse in itself, a betrayal, and a denial of the democratic and ethical and moral and political and social rights of the community, as it became quite clear a few months later, October 2014. So April 23rd, 2015 was only 7 months later. So when I told the legal section persons that I was in contact with, the legal section persons, there are 2 types of persons. One type is the administration. There are about 5 or 6 or maybe 7, at most 10 regular kind of employees who do the administration. They don't do the, quote, legal stuff. That is to say, they don't write the legal kind of communications, and they don't do the legal particular research. They do the administration, like exchanging communications and passing on messages, etc. So I had a number of contacts in the legal section, administration. Now, because of the perpetuating, ongoing, long-running criminality by Tower Hamlets Council, I had a long-running need for a long-running campaign with those people in the legal section. So I became aware of a number by name. I only had sight of them once or twice, one or two, but most of them I know by name, by communication, by telephone, etc. So I don't know which ones was or were the most kind of central to the perpetuation of the lying that they administered on behalf of the particular post holder called the monitoring officer, the legal person that is supposed to be the chief holder of the chief post as the, quote, legal advisor or legal expert in the council. So I had, for a long time, had dealings with these people about the behavior, about the criminality of behavior by the monitoring officer called Isabel Freeman. Now, Isabel Freeman had been compelled to leave Slough Borough Council, where she had been occupied. She had occupied the post of similar post, I think, in that she was given in Tower Hamlets later. Anyone who recruited her would have or should have known about her circumstances of leaving Slough. And yet she was appointed in Tower Hamlets. And Tower Hamlets, being a borough, in terms of the borough that the council is supposed to serve, being a diverse borough, needed somebody who was not a proven racist bully, which is what Isabel Freeman was in Slough. And she was caught up in a series of complaints against her, including serious complaints about her racist bullying of other employees. But it's not just her nature as a racist bully. It is Isabel Freeman's stupidity, lack of knowledge about the law, about the formal law, the law as it in the textbook. And she features, not anyone else, she features as the monitoring officer who protected the image of Luther Roman in a way that is scandalous and completely untenable, completely unacceptable. And I'm referring here to the debate that was initiated. It's a smaller debate than normally, but it was a debate that is on the records as the part of the proceedings of the House of Commons. That was actually initiated by a Conservative MP from a Surrey constituency, who is himself a former, quote, barrister. But he focused on Isabella Freeman and Isabella Freeman's advice in defense of Luther Roman's illegal behavior, unconstitutional behavior, undemocratic behavior. So I'm giving all these facts in a recording that is supposed to be the first part of the diagnosis of Fleet Street. This is the diagnosis. This is the extent of the diagnosis. I'm going way far back into the behavior of these people and their conducts in the council. So I've discussed Southwark Council and I've discussed Tower Hamlets Council. And I've discussed the reason coming from the behavior of these councillors in Kent County Council. So the Kent County Council can be seen now as capable of having criminals, just like Sadak Council, just like Tower Hamlets Council, and the criminality being made, quote, legally advisable and legally kind of advised activities. And that is the extent of the criminality that this society is faced with. The local councils are run by criminals for criminal agenda, and people like Marcy Baguma and the Sudanese would-be refugee. They were killed, but they are only tiny numbers. In the process of the legal system being corrupt, there is no room for councils, criminality being kind of the subject of an application. The availability of the judicial review through the High Court is a complete insult to the idea of judicial and review. It's an obstruction. Judicial review never is available for millions of cases that deserve actual airing by a proper court. So that is a joke. And the judicial review has got several pitfalls built in so that people don't dare to apply for judicial review. And that is the actual option, the only option available to people who have got complaints against councils generally. And in the cases, the judgment in the AA against Sadak Bara Council, that is also rare, because all the cases against local councils are thrown out by the court system. The court system doesn't trust anybody in the electorate as being truthful or being intelligent enough or being honest enough. So the assumption which the mafia of judiciary runs and the administration of the mafia is the assumption based on criminality, that ordinary people are not to be believed or not to be trusted. So all of this is part of the reason why the ban on eviction proceedings is only a part kind of respite for the victims of eviction proceedings. As I've said, eviction proceedings have been banned for the duration, but people have been being evicted, harassed, and criminally attacked by landlords and councils and others, even during the so-called ban. And the newspapers don't report that. The supposedly most intelligent or less kind of sensationalist paper is the Financial Times, and its main report is a damning one for the United Nations. Because many of the staff in the Green Climate Fund of the United Nations, it's an agency, are making allegations of abuse against the management and whatever. And that is damning, because the United Nations is the organization which I've been referring to most often, especially about all the charters, treaties, declarations, and conventions. Because in a country like the UK, where the regime is corrupt and the regime is racist and the regime is actually in denial of most of the international treaty obligations, the only hope that victims of such a regime have for redress, only hope for redress or any kind of redress that the victims have is if there is an effective, rigorous, and active and reliable United Nations operation in the particular field. For example, this is the climate agency. The climate agency is called the Green Climate Fund, which is being neutralized by allegations of abuse by the staff. The staff are being abused by the management. So, where do the victims go? Where do the refugees go? Where do the victims of planned murders like that of the Marcy Baguma go? Where do her relations go? If she has got any relations, where do they go? There is no place because, as I said, Keir Starmer in Britain, in the opposition leader, is an addendum of the conservative regime. Starmer is a Tory by his action. He may claim to be not only a Labour Party member, but also a socialist, as certified by John McDonnell 2 days ago. Now, I don't know what the tactics behind McDonnell endorsing Starmer as a socialist is, but it is clearly a dishonest statement McDonnell has made as part of a kind of freelance politics out of the front bench, because he is no longer a front bencher and he's just entertaining himself with this kind of joke. Starmer is not a socialist, never has been a socialist, and there is no evidence that he will be a socialist. And we are not talking about just Starmer not being socialist. Starmer is not even moderately opposing the conservative government violating the laws. And the satirical item, as I referred to earlier in the Private Eye current, or the new edition of Private Eye, dated the next Friday, it's satirical piece trying to mock Starmer and his stance on the racist attack on the refugees by Boris Johnson is a joke. It doesn't cut it. It doesn't actually deal with Boris Johnson. And the Financial Times is full of contradictions and splits in the USA and other places. And there is a piece about the Chinese quote giant, Huawei or Hawaii, whatever way you say it, taking over the market in India. And there are various groups in India that are divided over the Huawei takeover of Indian market. And there are reasons for this because India and China are rivals in many ways. And the Sun is back to the kind of sub-pornographic excuse to run a sub-pornographic front page. It's not the cancer they're talking about, it's the chance to run the picture of these females in that way. That is how Murdoch made his billions. The page 3 of the Sun was the main lure, the main attraction for a long time, and Murdoch, basing the scum in Wapping Tower Hamlets on the opposite side of Sadak, near the Tower Bridge, published the scum and made billions. And those billions helped him take over the American media, Fox News, etc. So it's all comes from the robbery of the public by luring them, hoodwinking them, misleading them, trapping them into the fantasy of the page three girl. That was the main pornographic kind of thing that was available in the daily press before the internet and all the other access to pornography. And there is this revival of Michael Grade, the corrupt porn baron, the porn merchant. Michael Grade, when he was the director or chair or whatever of the BBC, he was the chairman of the BBC, and he was also on Channel 4, and he was condemned as the porn kind of leader. And he is condemning the kind of tokenistic anti-slavery gesture over the prom that the BBC has been in the news about. And the line that the Michael Grade insertion in the Sun is following is the same as the Daily Boris Graph. They are using the word idiots about the BBC in the context of the BBC's tokenistic staging of the anti-slavery kind of teaching of the sound. And the Sun has got on page 13 the column by Rod Liddle. Now, Rod Liddle is shoring up. The Sun's agenda is to shore up Boris Johnson and the Tory regime. And it is not Boris Johnson that is under attack from Rod Liddle. It is Gavin Williamson. And so the media don't have, I'm looking for the news of the death by hunger or murder by hunger of the woman Marcy Baguma. And there is nothing. There is nothing on the editorial either. There is absolutely typical pornographic, sub-pornographic stuff in the Sun. And it's lulling the people into thinking that we are back to normal and the virus is gone and the economy is fantastic, because they ran earlier, a few days ago, a big front page saying that business is doing fantastic in this country, and they had a big picture of Boris Johnson on the front page saying that it's fantastic. So that is the brazenness of the lying that the media does, and there is no opposition. And this is a confession. Well, everything I've been saying about the NHS being throttled and strangled from the beginning by the Tories is obviously the idea of the NHS, that is vindicated here in the Times today. And it says that there are 15 million people waiting list, in the hidden waiting list on the NHS for treatment. Now, what I said about the pandemonium, my word is pandemonium, the regime fronted by Boris Johnson. I say fronted because it's a Cummings and other kind of unseen, mostly unseen kind of elements and forces that are controlling the regime, not Boris Johnson. But Boris Johnson is a beneficiary, no doubt. He is, after all, occupying the formally kind of the most, quote, important position in the, quote, government. But the fact that there is 15 million, there is a list of 15 million people in the hidden waiting list. Proves that the NHS has been killed off already. And the Times, which is running this as a news item, has been part of the attackers of the idea of NHS. And it still is. And the rest is the usual stuff. And they're also joining in the denunciation of the BBC about the last night of the proms. The BBC has made a ghastly mistake in its handling of the last night of the proms, according to Lord Grade. So it's not really about the racist murder of the asylum seekers or the death by starvation of the asylum seeker. And so there is nothing, and there is more publicity for Boris Johnson. There's a comparison with Germany about the Fowler scheme. They are extending it. But these are things that are still in denial of the racism, in denial of the people being denied of service, and in denial of the rights of the poor and the poor. And this is despite the fact that in the front page, there are 15 million people waiting in the NHS follow-up appointments. So there is no recognition of human rights violations by the UK government in the Times. And there is a kind of predictable space in the letters column for the Elga, Rule Britannia, and there is nothing in the columns, letters column or letters page about poverty and hunger. So is the Guardian filling the gap? The Guardian is filling the gap about Brexit. They're saying that the Germans have cancelled the talks about Brexit, and they're blaming the Boris Johnson side. So EU diplomat they're quoting is saying, since there hasn't been any tangible progress in talks, the Brexit item was taken off the agenda. Now that's another proof that the slogan "taking back control" was a joke. And there is a photo item about the Black Lives Matter protests in the USA, in Kenosha, in the USA, that has been raging. Apart from that, there is no follow-up in any significant way in The Guardian about the migrants. And I'll see if they have got anything about the murder of Marcy Beguma. And there is this bogus debate about masks. Pages and pages of so-called kind of fact-based discussion about the masks. There is nothing in the papers about the actual scientific evidence of tracking each stage A to Z of the virus and putting it in the context of the NHS and the health service and putting it in the context of the behavior of the personnel, let alone the behavior of the consultants and the roles. So the papers are full of items, but these are completely empty items. They're not talking about the reality of the numbers of people affected by the virus, the kind of route of the travel of the virus, and the connection and the actual spreading, how it does. There is no factual account given in any of the papers, including The Guardian, of any of that. So reading the papers, people will not be made any better aware of how to avoid the thing or how it happens or anything. It's all slogans and based on blaming one another and hiding the truth. The blaming is not an unintended accidental enterprise. It is an enterprise engaged in by the criminals in posts. And the people who are supposed to be auditing them or observing them, the so-called fourth estate, the slogan says, look it up, fourth estate is part of the so-called constitution. The press is supposed to be telling the truth and be objective and neutral. There is no chance. The British press is absolutely not telling the truth. Now here is a social affairs correspondent's little bit on page 13. This guy is very, very ignorant. This guy is called Robert Booth. He's supposed to be social affairs correspondent. And he's saying that black Britons are not as likely as white people to trust officials. Now, is that a surprise? Is that a surprise? Why? Why are African and Asian people, that is what he means, not likely to trust officials? If the officials, like the SADC employees, SADC Council employees, of course, the conspiring SADC Council employees included a number of African female criminals, and they conspired against the AA, either Sudanese or Somalian men. But the whole regime, the council, is mainly dominated by racists, regardless of the number of criminals that racists control who are themselves black. And there is this continuation of the typical Guardian garbage about diversity. And it is peddling the line that diversity is a non-negotiable part of the BBC programming. And it's peddling the BBC, saying that every BBC bosses are discussing diversity in every discussion, which is a complete lie and fabrication. The BBC is using diversity, just like the Black Lives Matter thing was used to show that it cares about dealing with racism. And here is the Guardian confessing again. It's Rajiv Sayal. Rajiv Sayal is of Indian origin, obviously, and Jim Watterson. And their headline is, report claims racism is endemic in UK's International Aid Department. Now, is that a surprise? I have been saying that all of these are corrupt. Forget about racism, they're essentially corrupt. These international aid things are corrupt from the word go. That they will be racist is hardly surprising. It follows. And the reason why the international aid is contaminated by racism is because there is no audit. And on the Guardian G2, there is a piece by George Monbiot. George Monbiot is writing a typical trendy piece about the poor being blamed by the rich for burning the planet, which the rich burn. I am not going to quote from Monbiot because Monbiot is a liar. He came to Brick Lane and he peddled one of the most notorious liars in Brick Lane, and he peddled him and gave him a platform and gave him credit for things that are absolutely not true. The same thing that Jeremy Corbyn's kind of policy head, Seamus Mill, did by The Guardian. Seamus Mill came to Brick Lane and he did a spill for a lot of local crooks and liars and gave them credit for things that they had never done and they have not done since. So that is the diagnosis I'm giving here. And the Daily Mirror is completely typically stupid because it is not talking about the issues of the death of Marcy Baguma or the Sudanese would-be asylum seeker. And they're talking about the mask or not mask as the shambles facing Boris Johnson. And there is nothing about racism, there is nothing more certainly about empire, there is nothing about imperialism, there is nothing about the hundreds of trillions stolen from Africa and Asia by the imperialists, and there is no recognition of the violence being caused to the targets of racist hysteria and hate campaign that Priti Patel is running and Boris Johnson is egging on. And the Daily Mail is suddenly realizing that it can use another tag to revive the business. It is saying that we have got ourselves a ghost town Britain. So we should be talking about that in the next part. So this edition is ending at 9:32 GMT on Thursday, the 27th of August, 2020.